How y'all doing? Well, all right, let me just tell you what I've been doing. I got back to America on November the 5th, and I took 2 days to plunder Trader Joe's in New York City. And there we are. Okay, so I'll tell you really quickly. I have spoken in Tulsa, Oklahoma. From Tulsa, I went to Houston, Texas, Nederland, Texas, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Mesa, Arizona, Tucson, Arizona, Sequim, Washington, Port Orchard, Washington, Fullerton, California, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Flew into Atlanta, Franklin, North Carolina, Jasper, Georgia, Somerville, South Carolina, West Columbia, South Carolina, 6 Mile, South Carolina. Whew. My wings are tired, guys. But listen, I only have 3 hours to present, so why don't we just get moving? What are y'all doing to me? Okay. First, I'm the only guest in Beit Tehila history to ever get the 0 minutes card. And now this. Today's presentation, The Line of the Maccabees. I am one of those people who've always been inspired by the Maccabees. Several reasons. First is, I was this Jewish kid growing up in the Bronx in New York City. It would have been really great to have some really tough warrior Jews along with me fighting back, so I wouldn't have to get into all those fistfights myself. Because remember, of course, being Jewish in my neighborhood made me the local Christ killer. Bless their hearts, right? Not. Anyway, I've now been blessed for over 9 years to be a resident of the city of Modi'in. I live where the Maccabees lived. That spot, some of you have heard me mention, that spot where Modi'in is, if you look at the tribal allotments of the land, Judah, Ephraim, and Benjamin all fit on that one little spot. Ooh, cool stuff. Let's go to the next slide, please. Is that it? The Hanukkah story. What's it all about? What's it all about? And now, what's amazing is being in America during this time. First of all, I really miss being home. I feel like E.T. Home. But I can only come when I'm not guiding. And this is a down period in the guiding season in Israel. So this is when I come. But the Hanukkah story, what's it all about? I meet people who say, well, yeah, it's the Jewish Christmas. It's a little bit of a shock. Next slide, please. Can't even read that from here. Okay, Alexander the Great in the aftermath. Ptolemies and Seleucids. Boy, that looks boring. We'll try to make it interesting. Everything's going along great in the land of Israel. Along comes a guy by the name of Alexander. People like to call him the Great. He conquers the land of Israel, most of the known world at the time, and things begin to change. Because there's a thing called Hellenism. Next slide, please. The Torah versus Hellenism. I apologize. After 9 years of being an Israeli, my level of improvement in Ivrit, in Hebrew, our native language, all of us, is only gradual at this point. But after 9 years of being in Israel, even though I work as a guide in English, I'm rapidly forgetting English. Soon I'll be semi-literate in both languages simultaneously. So I apologize for mistakes. In the Bronx, growing up, we spoke something very similar to English, so we'll try to get through it. Hellenism is the Greek ideal, not merely a concept or a way of thinking, but a way of life. It is the entire value system that valued physical beauty, that valued their whole different group of gods, that's plural, and the pressure to conform was even greater than y'all feel here in America, where you walk a walk that no one understands. Every once in a while, people come to me and say, Hanoch, why is it that you Jews, no offense. By the way, you'll notice something, and I've seen this in years of guiding. When an American says to you, no offense, they're about to offend you. It's kind of like, I'm saying it, so it doesn't count. People say, why don't you Jews understand what we're doing? So I wait till people finish their sentence, and then I ask them very gently, how well do your Christian relatives, friends, and neighbors understand what you're doing? Oh, they don't get it at all. Well, what do you want from us? Next slide, please. Torah versus Hellcake. Doesn't that look very similar to the one we just said? Oh, boy. So, in America, we think of Hanukkah in a very simplistic way. They wanted the Jews to eat pigs. We punch them in the nose, and it all gets better. Just think of it for a second. The vast majority of Jewish Americans are not religiously observant in the least. Could you imagine how Hanukkah would play out today? We need you to eat some pig. Great. You have Canadian bacon or, what's going on? The very fabric of us as the people of Israel depends upon our adherence to the laws of the Torah. Next slide, please. The Maccabees. We speak of the Maccabees. Who were they? Mattityahu and his sons, Yehuda, Yochanan, Elazar, Shimon, and Yonatan. Now, there are people who say, well, we'll get to you've heard these names before. You've heard them in English. Get used to the sound of your own language again. Amen. Bless your hearts. Next slide. Okay. Mattityahu. He's a Kohen, the priestly class. The Hellenization movement finally comes to Modi'in. A Jewish Hellenist, along with the Greek soldiers, is there. And they offer Mattityahu a small fortune if only he, as the leader, will go and eat some pig from the altar. So what did he do? Did he say, well, I want to get along in the neighborhood. I really could use that new SUV. I could use the money. He pulls out a sword. He kills the Hellenist. He kills the Greek and cries out, whoever is zealous for the Torah, whoever is loyal to the covenant with our God, follow me to fight for our faith in our Torah. Mattityahu ben Yochanan. Now, think of this verse a little later when we talk about the miracle of Hanukkah. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the miracle of Hanukkah? What is it we're celebrating? Most people will tell you it is the oil. And I love that analogy. I saw it recently on Facebook as well. That's where all intelligent information is shared. The cell phone battery, the 10%. You can't charge your phone, but it stays charged. By the way, who last week had to make an appointment at the Apple store in Brandon to try to get my battery changed, that miracle's not happening. There are some who say, somewhat jokingly of course, that the miracle of Hanukkah is that Mattityahu said something and all 5 of his sons listened. Now, you'll only relate to this if you yourself are a parent. Because if you yourself have only been a child so far in your life, you know that you always have listened to your parents. Sorry. Many of you have known that, and I'll relate this a little bit on Monday night, totally different presentation, really exciting stuff. One of the activist things that I was involved with when I was younger is I was one of 7 that went to Moscow to stage a sit-in in the former Soviet Union. Now we laugh at it. But you know, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're immortal. Nothing can happen to you. And I just remember the look on my mother's face when I said, yeah, Mom, I'm going to Moscow. Why? We're staging a sit-in. She's like, what did I... And the look in her eyes said, like, what did I do wrong as your parent? Later on, she was able to admit to me it's what she did right. Because there's a time in your life when you were called upon to do the right thing. And it's not going to be an easy time or an easy choice. Next slide, please. So we talk about the miracle of the oil. So to celebrate and commemorate, we not only light our Chanukiot, our Chanukiah is singular, Chanukiot is plural. We don't light a menorah. We don't light a Hanukkah menorah. The menorah in the Beit HaMikdash in the temple had 7 branches. We don't light that. That's only done in the temple. So for Hanukkah, we have a Chanukiah, which is 8, and a Shamash candle, the servant candle that lights the other ones. So to commemorate this idea of the oil, we eat fried foods. In the Southeast United States of America, they've been celebrating Hanukkah every single day. Bless their hearts, man. Now in America, for whatever reason, the custom is to eat potato latkes, fried potato pancakes. In Israel, however, we do sufganiyot, donuts. We have, and these donuts are like outrageous. These donuts would put Krispy Kreme out of business. These are caramel filled, these are chocolate wrapped, these are all kinds of things. And I have to tell you, when people say, Hanoch, what do you miss most about Israel? Well, this time of year, it's the donuts. Because the day after Hanukkah, you can't buy a single donut in the entire country. What's up with that? Next slide, please. And what you see wherever you go are Chanukiot throughout the country. It's an amazing concept for people in this walk, in this movement, who are surrounded and inundated by Christmas, just like I was growing up in the Bronx. And I have to tell you something. That was at a time when America hadn't developed the terminology yet politically correct. So, you had all kinds of stuff going. Everything was Christmas. The only thing you could watch on TV was the Yule log burning. We in public school had to sing Christmas carols. And it wasn't, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. Or it wasn't even the more modern version of like, Grandma, she got run over. She got run over by a reindeer, yo. No. This was the classic, remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day. And it never dawned on anyone, if you weren't Christian, you would find that a little bit strange to sing. But this is what you did. And it was all Christmas. It's all about Christmas. But in Israel, it's all about Hanukkah. We ain't got no Christmas. Ain't nobody got time for that. You're spending too much time on YouTube. If you get my references, you spend too much time on YouTube. Next slide, please. And you see Jewish kids throughout the world lighting Chanukiot. Now you look at them carefully and you'll say, hey, Bubba, that doesn't look like the Jewish kids we know from Tampa. No, they sure don't. Because Jewish kids throughout the world look like Ephraim does throughout the world. Every color, every ethnicity, everything you can imagine. That's the people of Israel. Next slide, please. Chanukiot of all shapes, all sizes. Next one, please. Hello. Oh, thank you. And what's great is, okay, the Blue one on the top, that's next to the walls of the old city. And those on the right, those are what you see hanging from, lampposts. Yeah, no Grinch, no Rudolph. I was in California a few years ago, 2015. I was speaking at a Hanukkah conference at Oasis Life Center. Rico Cortez was there, Monty Judah, Ed Harris, few people. And they took me for a ride to see the local lights in the neighborhood. So, well, you're Israeli, yeah, from New York City. Anyway, what was great was there was a lawn, and they had the most enormous characters. You had Santa, you had the elves, you had the Grinch, and there was Darth Vader. Was there like an episode that I missed, I guess? Next slide, please. Yeah, just soak in those pictures. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, no. Don't anticipate me. Okay. Our chayalim, our soldiers, wherever they are on the bases, are lighting Chanukiot. The guy on the left, it's hard in this picture to see it, but can anyone tell what he's holding in his arm? No, it's called a drone. A drone, yeah. We specialize in those. We the best. Yeah, even our drone operators. What's going on there, guys? Okay, next slide, please. There we are. When I first got to Israel, I actually worked for an organization that was raising funds to buy Chanukiot for soldiers throughout the country. And it was really cool. People, friends of mine in St. Francisville, Louisiana, donated that Chanukiah. And people in Louisiana don't even know where St. Francisville is. I didn't know where St. Francisville is. Then I spoke in places like Derrida, Monroe, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. Yeah, we'll talk about Mardi Gras another time. Next slide, please. Yep, those are our boys. Next slide. Observing the miracle of Hanukkah. Is the miracle of the oil? No. It's a miracle. It's a wonderful thing. But an unfortunate thing happened, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Next slide, please. We're going to take a look at what it says in the Siddur. In the Jewish prayer book, there's a section that you say for Hanukkah. So, since we've been observing it for about 2,100 years, let's take a look at what the Jewish side of the family is saying Hanukkah is about. In the days of Matityahu, son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hasmonean Hashmonai, and his sons, the wicked Greek kingdom, rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and to force them to transgress the statutes of your will. Great opening statement. It was then that you, in your great compassion, stood by them in the time of their distress. You championed their cause, judged their claim, and avenged their wrong. Nothing about oil yet. Next one. Oh, here we go. Out of the park. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the, next slide please, pure. You made for yourself great and holy renown in your world and for your people Israel. You performed the great salvation and redemption as of this very day. Your children then entered the holiest part of your house, cleansed your temple, purified your sanctuary, kindled lights in your holy courts. Oh, finally, some mention of oil. And designated these 8 days of Hanukkah for giving thanks and praise to your great name. It's the battle. It's the victory. It's the villagers, the farmers, the shepherds, the merchants who rose up against the mightiest army in the entire world to stand for our God and our Torah. The victory of Hanukkah time, the reclaiming and rededication of the temple, was not the end of the war. It went on and on and on and on. And finally, there's a mention of the oil. Finally. So now, why do 10 out of 9 people not know that? Because at the time, later on, the rabbinic sages, in recording the Talmud, played down the military victory because of persecution at that time. Politics, politics, politics. Next slide, please. So we think of the Maccabees as these great fighters. Now, a friend of my daughter's, Nadav, is a great illustrator. He has a page on Facebook called Samurai Jew. We in Israel are very creative. So he's done these great illustrations that I've used to show, a little vision of, kind of like a modern day Maccabee. And on the left, that's an Iron Dome battery. That's the system that we've developed in Israel. Israel has the world's most advanced anti-ballistic missile system. We get to practice with it a lot, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Yeah, even the donut is happy to be eaten because Hanukkah is such a joyous time. And we think of, these great warriors like, hi there. Next slide, please. I love these illustrations. Ba, 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 ba. Riding the missile. Next slide, please. But the problem is sometimes when lighting the Chanukiah, it can get a little out of hand. And you got to be careful. Don't worry. We'll get to serious stuff. Next slide, please. Now, here in America, everything is made in a kind of cartoon format because this is not where Hanukkah occurred. And most Jewish Americans, you'll notice I'm saying Jewish Americans as opposed to American Jews, because every other ethnic, racial, or religious group in America is known as, for instance, Black Americans, Irish Americans, Hispanic Americans, and then you have American Jews. They're so insecure that they got to put the American, we're American first. And they are. The vast majority of Jewish people in this country are Americans, liberal Americans, who by accident of birth were born of a Jewish mother. That's it. That's the whole commitment. So please don't think that your Jewish colleagues at work or your roommates at school or anything, if they're Jewish, necessarily understand why you're doing what you're doing, because they don't know about it themselves. So everything is, the story of Hanukkah, your little cartoons, more cartoons. Next slide, please. And of course, it's got to be a Rugrats element to it, too. A Maccabee's got to do what a Maccabee's got to do. How many people ever saw the Rugrats Hanukkah? Just me? Wow, y'all have been sheltered. Thank you. Thank you. Next slide, please. And what's really funny is as these illustrations go on over time, you kind of lose the image of what Hanukkah actually represented. And look at the one on the far right. He's got a hammer. That's supposed to be Judah the Maccabee. But he's got a body that kind of looks like the Greek ideal. Ooh, how did that happen? Next slide, please. Now, in Israel, we've got a different thing going. We have always viewed the Maccabees as twins, if you will, with our soldiers of the IDF, the men and women. We view them as the modern Maccabees. So you've got that illustration on the left. The one on the right is showing a bunch of really tough Jews, which in America is like, really, Jews like that? Yeah. Baseball bat in the background. Oh, yeah. Next slide, please. In the early days of the state, we combined the Maccabees with the idea of the pioneering soldiers who were building new agricultural settlements as well as defending the land. Next slide, please. We even had postage stamps showing this warrior, this kibbutznik. If you kind of remember back from the movie Exodus, Paul Newman, Ari Ben Canaan. That movie would never get made now. Unbelievable. But, you know, the kind of the ghost of the Maccabee behind them. Next slide, please. Lessons of the Maccabees. And we've got a lot of slides here, so we're moving fairly quickly. Loyalty to the Torah in the land of Israel. It's a lesson not of what the Maccabees were, but what we're supposed to be. That's number one. And by the way, you know, Pastor Nick was asking me, this is my 18th trip to the United States since August 2013. All self-funded. Stupid is as stupid does. To reach out to my brothers and sisters of Ephraim. I'm the only Jewish person in the entire world, sadly, who does what I do, reaches out to my brothers and sisters in mutual respect, not wanting to change Ephraim into Judah. I'm the only one. Only one still. And I've noticed, though, when I go to a congregation, the dividing line is usually Israel. When I tell them you've got to be committed to Israel, you've got to be saving to go to Israel, you've got to be focused on Israel, amen, people are either in or out. So we're right and they're wrong. That's it. I don't see any need to discuss that. Okay, what was the next point? Unity of the people of Israel. Ooh. That's a tough one. Unity. Now understand something. Unity does not mean conformity. Not at all. Our strength comes from our diversity rather than despite it. Very important point. That means that we don't have to be carbon copies of each other. You know, it's the classic, and I meet people all the time, well, you know, we pronounce the divine name, we're correct, and everyone else is wrong. So, you know, out of curiosity, you know, since you've taken that Facebook course on Hebrew, you know, well, you know, it's Yahuwah, it's Yahweh, it's Yahuwah, it's Yahweh, your way, my way, the highway. You know, the divine name is only 4 Hebrew letters. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. How does it become 8 syllables in English? Yahweh. Got to stop making stuff up. So the unity of the people of Israel is unity of purpose. We're not on the same page yet. And by the way, when I say we, I'm not talking yet about Ephraim and Judah. We're not there yet. And you'll hear this on Monday night. Please come. It's a much bigger problem. It's Ephraim, and particularly this time of year, Ephraim and your Christian relatives and neighbors. When you find yourselves, maybe not you, but people you know, unable to show any kindness and mercy to Christian relatives and friends who, by the way, are only doing the same thing that you did a couple of years ago. Don't you hate when the Jewish guy comes in and tells you that? Well, tough darts. Okay, what's the next one? Torah versus, no. Torah versus Hellenism. You've got to pick apart in your life what are real values and what's smoke and mirrors. You know, I meet people all the time, I can't afford to go to Israel. I understand, it's expensive. Are you saving? Well, have you stopped tithing to Target and Walmart and Costco and Sam's Club? Well, I noticed there are 3 brand new SUVs in your driveway. Well, I just had to have one. How old was your other car? It was 4 years old. We spend money on what we want to spend money on. You know, I meet people, I can't afford to go to Israel. There was a couple in a congregation for our Connect Israel tour that Mike Clayton and I both knew. And this couple put down the deposits for the tour and then withdrew them because they weren't going to get enough money. But subsequently, you see, thanks to the miracle of Facebook, they're in Hawaii. And they're having a great time. And by the plushness of the robes they were wearing, I pray they were clothed underneath. Like, it was a resort. I meet people all the time who say, no, I've got my vacation plan this year. Well, where are you going? I'm hiking in Vietnam and Cambodia. Now, I was too young, but if I had been a number of years older, I would have been eligible for Uncle Sam's all-paid, expense-paid excursion to Southeast Asia. Those poor folks got to hike in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos all they want. That's what you aspire to? You can call yourself Torah pursuant, Torah observant. You could tell me you're a disciple of Yeshua. You tell me that all the time. But you have no interest in going to Israel? How is this even possible? What's the next point? Thank you for making it bigger. My eyes appreciate it. Inhabitants of the land. The Maccabees, after consolidating power, began to get rid of the hostile native populations. Some they forcibly converted. It's the only time in the history of the Jewish people, by the way. And some they went to war with. There's a modern lesson that we'll draw from that momentarily. Foreign alliances and allies. Yikes. And I first did this presentation in 2015. And the American government was very different in 2015. But you know what? There's a song that The Who wrote a number of years ago when I was a kid. And the lyrics went, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Don't be confused by public statements. Don't even be confused by the fact that the American embassy has moved to Jerusalem. It's still a little bit of smoke and mirrors. It's good that they did, but it took 69 and a half years for America to admit what we knew was our capital. So let's keep things in perspective. And the next one is the temple. Whoa. And the last but not least, the children, the children, the children. You guys thought we were wrapping up the presentation? We're just warming up. Next slide, please. Okay, Shimon. Shimon, the last surviving brother. Matityahu died early in the war. His four of his sons died in the course of the battle. Shimon wrote, not foreign land did we take it, not over property of foreigners did we take control. We've returned to the inheritance of our forefathers, from which we were unjustly banished by our enemies. Boom. That's when the mic drops. It is our land. It is our land. There is no doubt about it. There is no subletting. By the way, don't expect the next elected government in Israel to say that any more than the current one. We're trying as best we can. And before you laugh at our form of government, never mind. Next slide, please. Okay. A little bit of reminders here. On the left, we have Israel. Well, we're missing the Golan Heights, which is up there somewhere, but you'll believe me. I usually don't allow a map that has the colored section there. Judea and Samaria. That's the biblical backbone of Israel. That's the biblical heart of the land of Israel. But sometimes having the colored section there enables you to see where it is that we're talking about. On the right, we have an illustration of the promised biblical borders. Usually when I speak in the nation of Texas, people always say to me, do you think there'll be enough room for us? You know, they all want ranches there. So we've got a lot more land than people realize. Okay? Next slide, please. If that slide from the back looks to you like a pox, like the measles, like a disease, it is. The Oslo Accords, 1993, when part of the land of Israel was given over to the so-called Palestinian Authority. The term Palestinian, by the way, came in vogue in 1964. Okay, this is not, ancient stuff. Yeah, it's a curse. Next slide, please. By the way, I'll be happy to tell you more about this, later. I do have to stuff my face with, a considerable amount of calories, but while we're doing that, we can talk. And I'll be here for the next couple of days. And Monday night's an exciting presentation. Prophecy of Zechariah. When he wrote, elderly men and women will yet sit in the streets of Jerusalem, and the men will have canes from their abundance of years, and the streets of the city will be filled with boys and girls playing in their streets. You know, he prophesied that with the ruins of the temple behind him. Talk about being in a desperate strait. But he saw, and I'll tell you, the Beit Tehila group that came back in October from Israel saw this with our own eyes, because we are living in the era of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Next slide, please. I took a picture of that couple right on Rehov Yafo, Jaffa Street. Okay, she was giving me a little bit of a funny look. I don't think guys have taken a picture for a while. Next slide, please. The Beit HaMikdash, the temple. It is all about the temple. Hanukkah is all about the temple. And then you've got these mental midgets running around America coming up with this idea that the temple was somehow not on the Temple Mount, but down in the city of David where it could have never fit. They don't know anything at all about the aqueducts, about the cisterns, about the archaeology. Many of them, most have never been to Israel. I'm a licensed Israeli tour guide. This is what, no. They know better. Why? As I've been told repeatedly wherever I speak. No. In many places that I've spoken. Not here. You Jews are wrong about everything all the time. It is supersessionism. Is it an attempt to rip it from our hearts? And what's funny is people say, well, you know, how much of an issue is this in Israel? It doesn't exist. I've spoken to architects. They said, what are they talking about? Well, don't they see? Well, they can see. They're not there. And they don't care to be, because they know better. Think of it this way. It's like Hashem's eternal truth has been lost from the world for 2,000 years. Thank God there's some idiot in Pocatello, Idaho right now who's churning out a YouTube video going to explain it all to us. How bizarre is that? Next slide, please. Oh, I wanted to show you a little bit about my hometown, what Modi'in looks like right now. I actually, until 2.5 years ago, lived in one of those buildings, the ones that are shaped like aqueducts. By the way, they had this great idea of having running water come out of the bottom aqueduct feeding a man-made lake below. That's the way the architect designed it. It was brilliant, except for the fact that the train tracks for the train that goes through Tel Aviv and up north goes right by there. There's something about water and train tracks that doesn't mesh very well. No water coming out now. We've got buildings that look like the spaceship up there. It's really cool. Next slide, please. That's what another building looks like at night, reflecting off the lake, Park Anava. And I love that other picture where it looks like, you know, yeah, that's my hometown. Our group actually got to stop in Modi'in. We went to the mall for lunch. Hey. Next slide, please. Near, in Modi'in, is the Beit Knesset, the synagogue of the Maccabees. It is only one of 7 in the entire country from the Second Temple period that's been unearthed. Please don't expect to come to Israel and see it, though. It's since been covered over because they don't have the money to set up a whole thing and do the full dig. Hopefully getting better. Next slide, please. Near, we have things that tell you we've got the graves of the Maccabees. But that's actually not true. Because in the book of Maccabees, it describes what the graves looked like and that they had a view of the sea. From where these graves are, you can't see it. But it's like a really cool thing to be on a bus and look over and say, the graves of the Maccabees are here. Not. I'm not one of those tour guides who just feeds you with silly information. Like Pastor Nick and I were talking, you know, in Beit, where it says that Jacob laid his head on the rock. I actually know there are tour guides who say, you want to know where the rock is, where Jacob put his head? Right here. And everyone says to me, oh, my tour guide, Shmulik, he knows everything. He's just Shoveling fertilizer. Next slide, please. Okay. Here we get to the issue of the inhabitants of the land. In Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those whom you allow to remain, of them shall be as thorns in your eyes and stings in your sides, and will vex you in the land where you dwell. It's fairly clear. Next slide, please. And because we didn't do it, that's what we got. We have no one to blame but ourselves. Next slide, please. The light of the Maccabees, you've got all these wonderful allusions, and the Peter, Paul, and Mary song from years ago, light one candle. And people, this is a dark time of year, and the light dispelling the darkness. You could think of, Yoda and Darth Vader. You can think of whatever analogy you want, but it is the light of the Torah. Hanukkah is not a series of battles that was fought for national liberation. It was fought for religious freedom. The religious freedom to observe the Torah, to circumcise our sons, to eat kosher food, to observe Shabbat, to Rosh Chodesh, the new month. We weren't allowed to do that. That's what it was about. Next slide, please. What are you doing to spread the light of the Torah? Sorry to make it personal. Now, I don't mean handing out tracts. Christians have been doing that to us for 2,000 years. It doesn't work. But you know what? There are widows and orphans in your community. There are poor people. Do you support your congregation? It's really interesting. I'll quote my dear friend, colleague, and brother, Mike Clayton, who one of the things that he said, which I think is absolutely brilliant, when y'all were in the church, you were told that the law was done away with forever, except for tithing. But now that you're in the Hebrew Roots movement, you know for a fact that the entire law is fully in effect, except for tithing. How did that quite happen? Next slide, please. What are you doing to share the spirit of the Maccabees? I was quite the revolutionary when I was younger. By the time I was 20 years old, I had already been arrested on 3 different continents. They were all nonviolent protests. We would have done anything in the world to protect a Jewish person anywhere. In the same way that now, I would do anything anywhere in the world to protect my brothers and sisters of Ephraim. But this is a spirit that can't be put in the drawer somewhere, or can't be put up, in the cupboard somewhere where you just can't get it. This is something you have to live with. Let's talk more about this spirit. Next slide, please. What are you doing to share the spirit of the Maccabees? Next one. Oh, yeah, that's an interesting slide. I'd forgotten I'd put that in there. You have the Chanukiot in Israel and in New York City, the old country for me, the lights where the trade centers had been. People forget 9/11. Americans have a very short memory. In 2008, they had right after 9/11, they began placing these large concrete planters in Wall Street to prevent truck bombs from going in. By 2008, they were all removed. People say to me, that the border with Mexico has been porous. People have been coming up, but don't worry, they're only Mexican refugees looking for work. Or maybe some drug dealers. But don't worry, there are no Islamic terrorists coming up with them. I pray that's correct. I doubt it. Next slide, please. Batidyahu's final message. My sons, be zealous for the Torah, etc. Remember the actions of your fathers. Remember Avram, Yitzchak, etc., etc. Carefully reflect on the previous generations. Learn from that one need not fear an evil man, even if he is strong and threatening. We have God on our side. Next slide, please. I want to share a little inspiration with you from the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, our modern-day Maccabees. Next slide, please. Next slide. And the next one. Doesn't mean all of our soldiers are religiously observant, but it seems like that really, really touched me. Next slide, please. Famous painting. Next one. There really is something amazing when our planes take off and you see the blue Magen David, the Star of David, which, by the way, was an ancient symbol. Didn't come up in the Middle Ages. You know, that's another thing. Oh, it's an occult symbol. Get a life. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, baby. Top Gun. Next slide. Next one. And the next one. The Merkava, one of the world's most astounding battle tanks. Israel, remember, modern Israel's existed for 70 years. The United States of America had Israel under an arms embargo between 1948 and 1967, which caused us to build our arms industry to figure out how to do things. We have something on it called the trophy system, which fires off a mini missile when an tank rocket comes against it. One of the most advanced tanks in the world. Next slide, please. We have 3 brigades that are co-ed combat units. Most women do not serve in combat. Next slide, please. And the next one. On Yom HaZikaron, our Memorial Day, a ceremony at the Kotel at the Western Wall. By the way, that's the Western Wall. It's not the Wailing Wall. Wailing Wall is a disparaging term used by our enemies, referring to it as the Jews' wailing place. It's the Western Wall. Please. What's interesting is on our Memorial Day, regular programming goes off the TV. The picture, the name, and the brief bio of every soldier who's ever fallen for the country comes up, stays on a few seconds, and moves on to the next one. You get up the next morning, it's still going. That's how we celebrate Memorial Day. That's how we commemorate it. It's not a day of sales. It's not the start of the summer season. It's to remember our fallen soldiers. Next slide, please. That's a prayer for the soldiers of the Defense Forces of Israel. Next one. You can get all that on. By the way, for those of you who don't have my cards are here somewhere, and you can always ask Pastor Nick, Pastor Russell, and contact me. I'll be happy to send you a link for all of the, for any of those, like the prayer for the Defense Forces of Israel in English. Next slide, please. Yeah, so close yet so far. Next slide, please. Let's keep going. Yeah. It's a little dark. So happy, so young. Next slide, please. Remember, 18, 19, 20 years old, American kids are thinking, like, what's the big challenge? So, like, what party are we going to go to this weekend? Our young men and women are dealing with the issues of, being a company commander, having men and women responsible to them. Next slide, please. Next one. And the next one. Okay, let's pause here. I love this. This is an illustration from Nadav, from a Samurai Jew page. And what's great is you've got the chayal, the soldier, and he's wrapped in a talit, but the talit is the Degel Yisrael, it's the flag of Israel, our national flag. Behind him, clearly the signs of war. He's focused on his tefillah, on his prayer. And you know, when we pray, prayer is not a quantitative element, but rather it's a qualitative element. You want to spend that time with Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. You want to be in dialogue with the Creator of the heavens and the earth. He's taking time out, and he's busy. He's real busy. But he wants to listen to you because you're his beloved children. Next slide, please. Next one. Be Maccabee inspired. Hey, baby, if this time of year doesn't ignite you like being tased, I don't know what will. This is an incredible time. This is not the Jewish Christmas. And you know, let's talk about those people in this movement who say you shouldn't observe Hanukkah. I got to tell you, it's really amazing. And I actually saw something on Facebook recently that said, well, you shouldn't observe Hanukkah. First of all, what people resent, they say, well, it's not an appointed feast of the Lord. That's absolutely true. But it's like Veterans Day, Memorial Day. And it commemorates the rededication of the temple. It commemorates now, what they resent is, it's the Jewish side of the family that got to do everything for Hanukkah. Because Ephraim was long gone into exile. We'll talk about that on Monday night a bit. But you know what? If we're talking about unity, if we're talking about the restoration and reconciliation of all of Israel, then darn right Ephraim should be celebrating Hanukkah along with their Jewish brothers and sisters. And labeling it pagan. By the way, if there's one word I could rip out of people's lexicon, it would be pagan. Everything is labeled pagan. There's nothing about it that's pagan. They just resent that they're in the out-group because they're making themselves in the out-group. Because when you say that, well, you Jews are wrong about everything all the time, how do you walk that one back? You don't. And what's great about this illustration is you've got the warrior on the left, you've got the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest on the right, and the menorah in the middle. Yeah, baby. Next slide, please. Kol Yehuda. I call my little thing Kol Yehuda. It's not a ministry. Kol Yehuda just means a voice from Judah. And in case you think, wow, I mean, you guys know I'm a tour guide. By the way, I guess this is a good time to mention, I'll talk more about it Monday night. Shavuot. I haven't checked the calendar, but it's probably in June of 2020. Start saving. Tonight, when you go home, take a little coffee can or a jar. Label it Israel Fund. Beit Tehila. 2020. Start saving. Start saving because I think Pastor Tikva is planning a huge group. But space will run out. Now's the time to reserve your space. Start saving, get ready. So when the announcement comes out that registration is in, boom, you've got it done. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Next slide, please. Okay, at the edge of a cliff. Does that look impressive? You think that's me? No, what are you, crazy? Next slide, please. Yeah, home. Next slide. By the way, that's right near Armageddon. You know, the nations of the world are supposed to be judged there. I've gotten the popcorn concession for that spot. Get your popcorn here. This is going to be great. Oh, yeah. Next slide, please. Jerusalem. Next slide. Galil. Up. Man, for those of you who've only been to Israel in the summertime, you don't understand. We get green. But it's now in the winter. It's our rainy season. Next slide, please. Masada. Next slide. Visit our website and begin your journey to the ancient land. KolYehuda.com. Next slide, please. Hey, Hanoch, what's up? Next slide. By the way, that has moved since, and it's next to the Chorva synagogue in the square in the Jewish quarter. Next slide. I've been really restrained today. I usually talk with my hands enormously. Next slide. What else we got here? Jerusalem Sukkot Parade. Next one. I don't even remember what I put up here. Next one. United to Restore. Next one. Next one. Next one. Ah! My favorite slide. I actually, those who've seen me present have seen this slide before. This is what I took the picture for, this presentation. I was guiding a Dutch Ephraimite group. Please understand, what you're doing, Beit Tehila, is a worldwide movement. And it was not caused by people who heard the same speakers. It's not caused by people who read the same book. It's not even people who went to hear Rico Cortez speak. It was driven by your own study and by you getting that divine call and answering. Other people have gotten that call and said, I'm not home. Don't bother me. I like doing what I do. I like my hedonistic lifestyle. Don't bother me with this Torah stuff. So we were in the Arava, in the desert, and it was beginning to get dark. And I said, guys, let's go to our cars. As we were walking to the cars, all of a sudden the clouds split for a brief second, and the sun came right through. I quickly grabbed my handy-dandy point-and-click camera, took a picture of it, and away we went. Yeah, keep that big for a second. What's great about it is the very first time I was showing it, I know some of you have heard this, and I apologize for repeating. I was in East Ellijay, Georgia. I don't always get to play the big venues like Brandon. I'm in East Ellijay, and there's a guy in the front row, and he gets really agitated, and he says to me, how did you set up the shot? I don't know what you mean. Well, he said, and you know, this is the classic American way when you say something and someone doesn't understand, you assume they're hearing impaired. So he said, how did you set up the shot? I said, I took my camera. He said, no. He said, let me show you. And he points, he said, the sun is obviously coming through where Israel is. Because below it, you've got Africa. Above it to the right, you've got Asia. And above it to the left, you've got Europe. So how'd you set that up? So I did the classic thing that we used to do in the Bronx growing up. It's like, yeah, well, man, no. I didn't set anything up. This was set up. But it's our reminder that we're to be the light in a world of darkness. That even though we're facing impending darkness, we're to push through it. You know, when I did this presentation, the elections in 2016 hadn't happened yet. And there were people after 2016 who began saying, well, everything's going to be fine now. Just wearing a hat that says, Make America Great Again, doesn't make America great again. Now, I hate to get involved in American politics, but it's not like you guys had a choice. But the issue is not what the government in Washington is going to do, or not even in my case what the government in Jerusalem is going to do. The question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in a world that swirls around and offers you all kinds of things? Like I made a joke earlier about Mardi Gras. What a concept. I'd never heard of such a thing. I was in Alabama years ago, and this woman was explaining Mardi Gras to me. So I said, well, let me get this straight. You mean to tell me that because Lent is coming and you're going to give something up, the idea is to cram in as much sin as you possibly can in this time period? She said, yeah, you got it. I ran back to Israel. I told people between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, forget about those 10 days of return. We're going to party like it's 1999. And on Yom Kippur, we'll just ask for forgiveness. No, no, no. You are the Maccabees of today. You are faced with a world that will extinguish your light of Torah if you don't do something about it. By the way, that doesn't mean clubbing your Christian relatives and neighbors over the head. It doesn't mean denigrating other Ephraimite groups or congregations. It means opening up your heart, being the light and not the heat. And there's a difference. Toda Rabba. Happy Hanukkah. Thank you so much for everything, guys.